There were only 3 rules for the dance floor. No glass, no food, and no exes. She broke 2, and invited the 3rd. I was leaning against a pillar in a rented suit I hadn't worn since my cousin's funeral. One cuff button was missing. No one noticed, including my wife. She was too busy spinning under string lights with a man who hadn't even been introduced to me. His hands, I still remember, sat just a little too low on her back. Not scandalous. Just enough to keep it deniable. But the look in her eyes wasn't deniable. Not to me. She looked alive. Really alive. The kind of alive I hadn't seen in months? A year? I lost count. But there was something in her that lit up, and whatever it wasn't lit by me. Her name is Della. I'm not going to describe her like some lovesick poet. That's not what this is. I'm not here to list her freckles or talk about how her laugh used to echo through her kitchen. This isn't a eulogy. It's an unraveling. Because when I saw her dancing with him, this guy in rolled sleeves, sneakers at a formal event, smirking like he already had the punchline to a joke I hadn't heard, something inside me tilted. Like a glass on the edge of the table. And when she dipped back laughing, holding his hand with fingers that used to graze mine just to make sure I was still there, I realized something terrifying. She wasn't looking at me. She hadn't for a while. But this was a whole new level. I wasn't just neglected. I was gone. I was scenery. I was background. So I left. No goodbye. No message. No slammed doors or shattered glass. Just stepped out of the venue, passed the coat check, into the parking lot, and drove home. Alone. I fed our cat, brushed my teeth, folded the blanket on the couch. Then I sat in silence until sunrise, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and wondering how long I'd been pretending not to notice. She didn't come home that night. Her excuse the next morning? We all crashed at Callie's. It was a wild night. Callie, right? She forgot I know Callie doesn't drink. And that Callie posted photos from her own bedroom at 10:47 p.m. Alone. In pajamas. Watching reality TV. I didn't say a word. Not yet. Because while she slept off her lie, I started pulling threads. Quietly. Gently. And beneath the polished surface of just one dance, I found something rotten. Something planned. Ongoing. Hidden in plain sight. What started as a dance was only the first step in a choreography I was never meant to learn. But I was done standing on the sidelines. And if she thought I'd just disappear quietly like I did at the party, she was about to regret everything. She came home late the next night too. Not suspiciously late, just enough to feel rehearsed. Just enough for her to walk through the door like nothing had changed. A bag of takeout in her hand, no apology in her eyes, no explanation offered. She tossed the keys into the bowl by the door and asked, "You hungry?" I got your usual. My usual. Like I was a customer she barely remembered from her shift. Like she was fulfilling a transaction, not a marriage. I stared at her for maybe 3 seconds too long, but she didn't notice. Or she pretended not to. I wasn't even sure anymore. We ate in silence, the sound of a fork tapping plastic louder than either of us wanted to admit. She told me about the latest event she was planning, something about a vineyard wedding, imported orchids, and a champagne wall that cost more than my car. I nodded in the right places, but my brain was busy reconstructing the timeline from the night before. I wasn't obsessed. I was certain. There's a difference. Something about the way she smiled at nothing while stirring her noodles, like her mind was somewhere else. Someone else. That night I waited for her to fall asleep. I lay beside her until her breathing changed, until the slow exhale of someone who had no idea the person next to them was already gone in the ways that mattered. I unlocked her phone. Not because I wanted to, because I had to. I'd never done it before. Ever. But when the trust in a relationship dies, all that's left is evidence. It wasn't hard. She hadn't changed the passcode. Part of me hoped I'd find nothing. Maybe a harmless chat. A meme. A work complaint. But instead, I found a name I didn't recognize. Reese. Just that. Reese. No heart emoji. No suggestive texts. Just normal, vague, boring exchanges. But it was the timing that hit me like a punch. The night of the dance, the same night she crashed at Callie's, there were 33 messages between them. I read them all. Short, clipped, coded. But you don't need a translator to understand guilt. Messages like, "Did you delete?" and "You were right, he didn't say anything." And the last one, "Tomorrow will be tricky." Act the same. I put her phone back and stared at the ceiling for the rest of the night, my heart a quiet scream. I didn't wake her. I didn't confront her. Instead, I started a file on my laptop called Reality. All caps. I don't know why. Maybe because I needed something to feel solid in the fog I was about to walk through. I backed up her messages. I noted the timestamp of every text, every call. Not because I was building a case, because I was building clarity. If I couldn't have truth from her, I'd force it from the silence. The next morning, she kissed my forehead. Just a peck. Soft. Casual. Routine. She smelled like that vanilla clove scent again. I wanted to ask if Reese liked it too. Instead, I smiled. It wasn't fake. It was armor. I went into work like normal. But I left early. I took the train to the other side of the city to the address Reese had sent her 2 days before. I told myself I'd just look. Just confirm. No confrontation. No drama. But as I stood across the street from that sleek, modern building, I saw her reflection before I saw her face in the mirrored glass as she stepped out of the lobby and into his car. She wasn't smiling this time. But she also wasn't hesitating. She got in. And they drove off. My hands were shaking, but not with rage. With disbelief. With something colder than anger, detachment. Because in that moment, standing in the shadow of someone else's choice, I realized what kind of story I was living in. I wasn't in a misunderstanding. I wasn't in a bad patch. I was in the prologue of a betrayal I hadn't even fully read yet. And I hadn't even turned the page on what came next. I didn't go home right away. I couldn't. Not after watching my wife get into another man's car with the kind of comfort that only comes from repetition. It wasn't their first time. That much was obvious. There was no nervous glance over the shoulder. No hesitation. She didn't even check her phone. She just got in like she'd been doing it for weeks. Months, maybe? I stayed on that street corner long enough for the cold to seep through the soles of my shoes. Every part of me wanted to follow them to see exactly where they went, but I didn't. Not because I didn't care, because I cared too much. If I saw it all at once, I was scared I'd break. And right now, I couldn't afford to. I needed control. So I waited until they were gone, took a photo of the building, and called in sick to work the next day. The next morning, I returned to the neighborhood, this time prepared. I had my old DSLR camera, a notebook, sunglasses, and a fake delivery jacket I found at a thrift store that said Quick Courier. I looked ridiculous, but no one questioned me as I stood near the mailboxes pretending to wait for a signature. An older man let me inside the lobby without asking. The place was sleek, quiet, expensive. I scanned the tenant directory. There was no Reese. Not on any floor. But a few names were clearly fake placeholders with no last names or initials, just Unit 3B or P. Allen. I didn't need to guess for long. At exactly 11:12 a.m., I saw Della walk past the lobby window. She was wearing the same coat from last night, her hair pulled back, sunglasses on, but I recognized the way she pressed the elevator button with her middle finger, a nervous habit she's had since college. I ducked behind the vending machine, heart pounding like I was 16 and sneaking into a concert. The elevator dinged. She disappeared. I watched the floor counter tick upward. 2, 3, pause. That was it. 3rd floor. I counted to 30, then took the stairs. I found the apartment easily, 3C, the only one with a red painted door. The rest were steel gray. Odd. Intentional. I took note. There was a faint sound coming from inside. Music. Jazz, maybe? I placed my ear gently to the door and heard 2 voices, hers and a man's. Not arguing. Not laughing. Just talking. Comfortable. Domestic. Like they'd done this before. I didn't stay long. I couldn't. My lungs were tight and my legs felt hollow. I snapped 2 photos, one of the door, one of the hallway, and got out of there before anyone saw me. That evening, I said nothing. Della came home around 6, carrying groceries. She made dinner. Pasta, salad, wine. She even lit a candle. I wanted to ask if it was guilt that flavored the sauce, if she was trying to stage a performance she thought I'd applaud. But I played my role. I asked about her day. She told me about a client who cried over table linens. She laughed. I laughed. We looked like a marriage. We sounded like one. But beneath the surface, I was documenting everything, building a case not in court, but in my heart. I needed to understand how far this went. 2 days later, I went back to the red door. This time, I wasn't alone. I'd called in a favor from a friend of mine, Jared, who used to do freelance surveillance work for insurance fraud. He owed me from years back when I helped him avoid a messy audit. I didn't tell him the whole story, just that I needed a camera set up near an apartment door for 72 hours. No faces. Just entries and exits. He didn't ask questions. He brought a disguised motion sensor cam, the kind you clip near a hallway smoke detector. We installed it in minutes and left. What that camera caught over the next 3 days changed everything. Not just Della. Not just Reese. There were others. Men. 2 different ones. One arrived at night, stayed 20 minutes. Another came during lunch hours, always carrying wine. None of them looked surprised to be there. None looked confused. One even had a key. The red door wasn't Reese's apartment. It was hers. And suddenly, this wasn't just infidelity. It was a second life. It took me a few tries to work up the nerve, but on Friday morning, I walked into the building pretending to deliver a lost package. The doorman didn't even look up. I rode the elevator alone to the 3rd floor, rehearsing the words in my head in case anyone stopped me. I didn't knock. I didn't press my ear to the door again. I just slid a folded note under apartment 3C. It was unsigned and said one line, "Your secrets are leaking." I didn't wait for a response. I wasn't trying to scare her. I just wanted her to know. The mirror wasn't one way anymore. Later that day, I drove straight to the property records office downtown. That building, her hidden apartment with the red door, wasn't owned by some mystery man. It was a private rental unit under a management firm. I paid a $15 lookup fee and gave them the unit number. The lease was under one name, Della Carter. I stared at the printed form like it was in a foreign language. Same spelling, same signature. The lease had started 6 months ago, overlapping perfectly with the slow death of our intimacy, her sudden schedule shifts, and the nights she claimed she was working late. The rent was being auto-deducted from an account I didn't recognize, one I never had access to. That night, I couldn't sit across from her at dinner. I went out instead, told her I was catching a game with a coworker. She barely reacted, said have fun without even asking which team. I ended up just driving aimlessly for 2 hours. Parked under an overpass. Stared at nothing. I wasn't angry. That was the strange part. I felt hollow, like I'd left the version of myself that trusted her somewhere in the past and couldn't find the road back to him. When I got home, she was already in bed. Light off, back turned, breathing steady. I looked at her in the dark and tried to remember the last time I felt like her husband, not her placeholder. The last time she reached for my hand just to feel me there. Couldn't, so I didn't crawl into bed beside her. I didn't even enter the room. I walked to the spare room and closed the door quietly behind me. And in that silence, I realized something I hadn't dared to accept until then. She hadn't been slipping away. She had already left. It was Saturday afternoon when I found the folder. She'd gone out to meet a client at some rooftop bar across town. I stayed behind, said I needed rest. The truth? I needed space to search. Not like a madman. No rifling through underwear drawers or flipping furniture. I was methodical, detached. I told myself if I didn't find anything, I'd stop. I'd move on. But deep down, I knew better. You don't search unless you've already lost something. It was in the bottom drawer of her desk, tucked beneath an old stack of stationery, the kind she hadn't used in years. A simple gray folder. No label. No lock. No warning. Inside were printed emails. Dozens of them. Not digital. Printed. That struck me as strange. The sender name on all of them, J. Evren. At first glance, they looked like business updates. Casual. Corporate sounding. But then the tone shifted. One line said, "He won't know. He never asks." Another, "If he finds this, you'll need to vanish." That word vanish sank in slowly. These weren't affair messages. This wasn't about lust. It was strategy. There were also receipts. One for a P.O. box in a different part of the city. One for a storage unit paid in cash. A third for a legal service, a name I'd never seen before, accompanied by a letter saying, "Congratulations on opening your personal trust." My stomach turned. I read everything twice, then again, trying to make it mean something else. But the truth was louder than any denial. Della wasn't cheating. She was removing herself, piece by piece, financially, emotionally, legally. She was building an exit I was never meant to see. I put everything back exactly the way I found it. I didn't take pictures. I didn't email copies. This wasn't evidence for anyone else. This was my wake-up call. When she came home, she kissed me on the cheek like nothing was crumbling beneath her smile. She had no idea I had just read her escape plan. and the only question left in my mind was, how long has she been waiting for me to disappear, so she wouldn't have to? Sunday morning, I didn't touch my coffee. I just stared at it, swirling it with a spoon like it might spell out an answer. Della was still asleep, her phone turned screen down on the nightstand. I already knew the passcode by heart, but there was nothing left I needed to see on there. Everything that mattered was already in motion. I couldn't stop thinking about those receipts, especially the one with the P.O. box and the storage unit. What was she keeping there? Photos? Cash? More papers? Or was it something darker, something that made her print out emails and hide them in a drawer like a war criminal? By noon, she was out again. This time it was brunch with Ellen, the same Ellen she'd used in at least 5 different alibis over the last 2 months. I didn't call her out on it. I just waited until she left, changed into jeans, and drove out to the storage facility address printed on the paper. I didn't even hesitate. Whatever I found there, I needed to see it with my own eyes. The place was off a narrow road behind a row of abandoned shops. The office was dusty and reeked of cheap air freshener, and the guy behind the desk barely looked up when I slid the paper across the counter. "I'm here on behalf of Della Carter," I said, trying not to sound rehearsed. She asked me to grab a box for her. He didn't ask for ID, just handed me a clipboard. "Unit 114, he said without blinking. "I guess people storing secrets don't expect to be followed." I walked down the long hallway of padlocked doors until I found it. Unit 114. The lock was old school, combination dial. I knew exactly what numbers to try. Our wedding date 08-24. Click. It opened. What I found inside wasn't what I expected. There were no love letters. No clothes. No cash. Instead, there were binders. 4 of them. Labeled not with names, but dates. March, May, July, September. Each one filled with spreadsheets, statements, and internal memos, all stamped with logos from companies I didn't recognize. Financial, corporate, legal. But on the bottom of one document, I saw something that made my chest tighten like a vice. My name. Not as a recipient, but as a subject. There were tracking logs, movement reports, notes on where I went, what I spent, who I interacted with. One page had a copy of my bank withdrawals over a 60-day period. Another had screenshots of emails I'd sent from work. Someone had been documenting me. And the handwriting. I recognized it. It was hers. Della had been following me, logging my routines, my habits, my money. I sat there on the cold concrete floor surrounded by pages about my own life that I hadn't written. It felt like reading a biography of a stranger with my face on the cover. I wasn't just being replaced, I was being profiled. That's when the truth began to click into place. This wasn't just an affair. This wasn't even just an escape. Della was preparing to erase me. She was collecting the blueprint of my life, piece by piece, until she could predict every decision I'd make and stay 3 steps ahead of it. She didn't just want out. She wanted to walk away clean, with the upper hand, while I stood there wondering what I'd done wrong. But now I knew. And she had no idea I'd found her game board. That night, I couldn't sleep. I didn't even try. I sat in the living room with the lights off, just me and the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the folder from the storage unit open on my lap. I read the pages again, slower this time. I saw things I hadn't noticed earlier, highlighted phrases, red ink circles around my workplace address, even a note that said, Mondays, alone between 6 to 9 p.m. I stared at that line so long it blurred. That's when I realized this wasn't just prep for a divorce. She was planning something more aggressive. Something surgical. If I didn't know better, I would have thought she was trying to prove I was unstable. Like she was setting the stage for me to fall apart on record. And maybe that was the point. Maybe she'd decided it was better if I didn't just disappear quietly, but if I collapsed in a way that made it look like her leaving was the only reasonable solution. So I made a choice. I wasn't going to confront her in some melodramatic scene. I wasn't going to shout or cry or throw the binder on the floor like some husband in a B-movie breakdown. That's what she probably expected. What she probably wanted. Instead, I planned something else. I went back to the storage unit the next day and copied the most important files, not digitally, but manually. I rewrote every relevant line into a clean notebook page by page with careful dates and side notes. I wanted it to be personal, intimate, tangible. I wanted to hold the truth in my hands in a form she couldn't delete. Then I returned the originals to the unit and locked it again with the same code. That night at dinner, I brought up something small. Something designed to shake the illusion. "Do you remember what you were doing on July 14th? I asked her casually, in between bites of salmon she barely seasoned. She blinked. What? July 14th, I repeated. You said you were in Rochester for the Floral Expo. But I ran into Dan a few days ago, and he mentioned the whole event got canceled last minute. Her fork froze midair. She covered quickly, said, I went anyway. Had non-refundable hotel bookings. I nodded like that made sense. Right? Of course. But I didn't push. She wasn't ready yet. The next day, I took a half day from work and drove to the P.O. box address from the receipts. I stood in line behind an elderly woman mailing birthday cards and a guy sending off his taxes. When it was my turn, I gave the box number and said I'd been asked to pick up mail for my wife, Della Carter. The woman behind the counter didn't hesitate, handed me a small black envelope with no return address. I thanked her, walked back to the car, and opened it right there in the lot. Inside was a key. That was it. No note, no label, just a small silver key on a plastic tag with a number, 9 to 27. My mind raced. A locker? A drawer? A safety deposit box? That night, I placed the key on the edge of the bathroom sink, where she'd see it when she went to brush her teeth. I didn't say a word, didn't ask, just left it there, like a breadcrumb from a trail I knew she thought she'd buried. And sure enough, just before midnight, I heard her come out of the bedroom. I stayed still in the dark. I didn't move. I just listened as she picked up the key and gasped. It was the first real sound I'd heard from her in weeks. The sound of something slipping, of her rehearsed control breaking for just 1 second. The next morning, she made me breakfast. Eggs, toast, coffee. She hadn't made me breakfast in almost 2 years. I didn't eat a bite. I just smiled and said, thanks, because now I knew. She was scared, not of what I knew, but of what I might know next. She knew before she turned the key. I think that's what haunts her now. Not that I left, but that she felt it coming and still believed she had time to outrun it. The last time I saw her face, I was standing in the hallway of our apartment, suitcase zipped and resting by the door. She had just walked in, hair windblown, heels in one hand, phone in the other. She froze when she saw me. Her eyes went to the suitcase, then to the man she no longer expected to be brave. I told her I knew. Not everything. Not every name or date. But enough. I told her about the red door, about the binder, about the key. And then I told her I wasn't angry. That part confused her the most. She kept waiting for a fight that never came. She said things like, it wasn't supposed to go this far. And, you don't understand what I've been carrying. She tried to explain pieces of herself I no longer had the desire to analyze. But I listened anyway, not because I wanted to forgive her, but because I wanted to leave clean. She cried when I said I was done. Real tears. Not manipulation. Not strategy. Just grief. Not for me, I think, but for the version of herself she destroyed along the way. The one who once stood across from me, holding a coffee in both hands, asking if I believed in love that builds slowly. She didn't beg me to stay, and I didn't ask her to follow. I walked out, not with a dramatic exit or a slammed door, just a quiet click behind me, and then sunlight on my skin. I had nowhere to be, no plan, no destination. But I felt lighter than I had in years. Like I'd been holding my breath since the day I first noticed her laughter belonged to someone else. It's been 3 months now. I live in a smaller place, closer to work, closer to the park where I take morning walks. I read more. I cook. I sleep through the night without waking to phantom questions. The world didn't collapse like I thought it would. In fact, it got quieter, calmer, real. Della reached out once. A short message. You were right. I'm sorry. I miss you. I never replied. Not because I hated her. I don't even think she's a villain. Just a woman who got lost inside the life she helped build and convinced herself it was someone else's fault. But as for me, I found something better than closure. I found peace. And sometimes that's all the ending you need.